Are you a perfectionist? Have you ever had this feeling where you have some deadline and you have some work to do and you're just like going on and on and on and you just feel like your work is not good enough and you just don't have the strength in you to submit your work until it's really late, and then you're just like or you put a hand on your heart and then you just submit despite not wanting to. Have you ever had this sense where you wanted to put yourself out there, when you wanted to meet someone new, you wanted to network with someone, and yet you just couldn't find the right things to say and you just never ended up talking to them? You just like are very perfectionistic, let's say about your looks, like you're just in front of the mirror every day. Even when you have done all that you could, you're just like micro adjusting everything and just extremely conscious about looking perfect. And if any of this sounds like you, then you might be a perfectionist. Then this video might be helpful. In this video, I'm going to talk about perfectionism. I'm going to talk about what it is and give you some tips around how to overcome perfectionism and some strategies and tactics that will help you come out of it. If you're enjoying this sort of high quality psychology content, then a sub to the channel would be appreciated. Alright, let's talk about what perfectionism is. And I'm going to be a bit blunt, a bit point blank. And I'm going to talk about what perfectionism is in its deepest form. So here's what it is, even if you might not like to hear this. Perfectionism is a form of self-hate. Let's call it what it is. It's a pattern that we do, which is a form of self-hate. It comes under the broad umbrella of self-hate. And you're like, what's so self-hating about not submitting an assignment? What's so self-hating about wanting things to be good? What's so self-hate about looking the best and presenting the best of me to the world? And here's the answer. There's nothing wrong with being presentable. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing your best and performing highly. In fact, I highly encourage high performance and I talk a lot about it in this channel. But what perfectionism is a lack of acknowledgement that we can never be perfect. It's a lack of humility. It's a lack of understanding that no human can ever achieve like a perfect standard. Like no matter what I do, I will never be able to get all my hair to perfectly align. And even if I get my hair to align, there might be other things. And that's just talking about looks. Like there's so many parts of this video that I might stress about. And if I'm stressing about all of it and never accept the fact that life is complex enough that I'll never be able to control everything, then I'll never be able to put videos out there. And then I'll never be able to help or reach people like you. So it's not about, you don't do the best you can, you put all your effort in it, but this is about acknowledging human limitation. It's letting go of control for the things that we do not have control, and even for the things that we may have control, it may not be possible to do all of it. So the characteristic of perfection and the reason why it's self-hate is oftentimes we have an unrealistic standard that we are aiming for. We have this bizarre, unrealistic, unreasonable standard that we have. And so for example, you may look at an Instagram model and think that, hey, I don't look like this model, but we may not realize what's the infrastructure that goes into making that model look that way. Like they might have had a lot of plastic surgeries. They might have had a huge crew of makeup artists and hairdressers, and that might not be something that you may have at this point in your life. And so instead of beating yourself out there, you may just realize that, this is perhaps an unrealistic standard and perhaps not even aligned with my values. But anyway, the characteristic of perfectionism is having an unrealistic standard. And by definition, an unrealistic standard is an unattainable standard. And if you're subjecting yourself to attain that unattainable, then that is what I am calling self-hate. And that is what a lot of psychotherapists and psychoanalysts would call self-hate. So let me give it to you straight with all my heart that perfectionism is actually a pattern of self-hate, and it is worth looking at it that way and looking at the reality of it. And acceptance is the foundation of emotional intelligence. So even if it might come across a bit harsh, I think knowing what it is truly is the first step in healing it. So having talked about what perfectionism is, now let's talk about how do we go about healing perfectionism? How do we go about being more imperfect, for lack of a better word, in the sense that we are more accepting of ourselves, in the sense that we are more kinder to ourselves? So I'm going to give you a couple of provocative questions, a couple of probes that will help you find what makes you a perfectionistic person, or help you give some insight around your perfectionism. So here's the first question. What am I afraid will happen if I'm not perfectionistic? So, I invite you to think of a scenario. Perhaps you had a deadline at work, or perhaps you're concerned about your looks. And think about this. What happens when you don't do your hair? Like, who are you afraid to disappoint? That's the second question. Who are you afraid to disappoint if you don't look your best? Or if you don't do your hair? Or what will happen if you don't submit the perfect work? What happens if you submit a bit of a first draft? Like, can you imagine, let's say, your instructor being annoyed at you perhaps? Or perhaps you're imagining, if you're younger, your parents getting annoyed at your grades, or your teachers being like, you are not performing as well. Or do you imagine someone like your significant other saying that, you don't look as beautiful today, or something like that? I don't know, but these thoughts that we may have, as irrational or rational they may be, these are the ones that emotionally drive us towards being perfectionistic. And so it's worth digging deeper and seeing what are we afraid will happen if we are perfectionistic. And just like feeling those feelings fully. It's going to be a vulnerable space if you enter that fully, and you're going to feel a lot of shame. And the purpose of these probes was to get you to that shame. So just discover what is this shame that is underlying this perfectionistic pattern. And so, of course, the next step would be work on healing shame. Now, shame is the sense of feeling unworthy. Shame is the sense that my deepest core is unworthy. It's not that I did something wrong. It's not I performed badly or I could have done this better. But it's this sense that I am fundamentally unworthy. I'm just not worth it. I'm not attractive enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not sexy enough. Whatever the phrase you may use. Underneath it is this idea that as I am, I don't deserve love or I don't deserve admiration. And so understanding perfectionism deeply is about understanding shame deeply. And I'm not going to go too deep into how to heal shame here because I have an entire video dedicated to shame. So I highly invite you to check out that video after this video. This step was to heal shame. The next step to overcoming perfectionism is to actively practice being imperfect. So all your life you may have aimed for the perfect and being stressed about it. But in this experiment, I invite you to err on the side of imperfection. Can you show up to work today a little bit imperfect? I'm not saying, just show up in your pajamas or something. Of course, be presentable or whatever the professional requirements are. But perhaps you could not pay that much attention to your looks. Or if you're talking about another context of putting yourself out there on YouTube, perhaps you could record a video, just like a selfie video, not worry too much about your lighting or your camera, but just record something off your phone and just put it out there. Maybe not even edit it. And what that will give you is some sort of momentum. A lot of people may even compliment you because you had the courage of putting yourself out there. And that may help you break this association you may have of imperfection with punishment, and you may develop the reverse association of when you put yourself out there, however imperfectly it is, that is a gift to the world. That is a benefit to the world. Like every time you're being perfectionistic and not taking action as a result, especially when the perfectionism is disabling, especially when the perfectionism is making you more apathetic, then you're depriving the world of your own light, of your own energy, of your own love. And so I highly recommend putting yourself out there if you're considering something like putting a YouTube video out there or putting your photo out there, whatever it is. So practice imperfection. There's this idea, the next step is to practice embarrassment, which is a form of imperfection. So there's a lot of techniques that you can do to embarrass yourself intentionally, and it can be a lot of fun. So for example, you can dress in a weird way and just roam around the street. So even though it is not Halloween now, you may dress up in a Halloween costume and walk around the street. Now I completely realize this might be a much heavier load than what you're used to, and it might feel extremely jarring, but you don't have to go to the 100-pound weight. You can have like a 5-pound weight where you just wear like maybe a weird hat or maybe a weirdly fluorescent colored watch or something like that. And you may actually find that people actually compliment you more for showing some personality. So this is also good for developing confidence. Like when you don't have that embarrassment circuit that active, then people actually like that, and people like to be around more easygoing people. So that's my next step, practice embarrassment. And so the final tip I'll give in concluding this video is, now that you have erred on the side of both being too perfectionistic and hopefully you have done some exercises that are completely embarrassing and anti-perfectionist, now it's your time to calibrate. Now it's your time, now that you can stretch on either side, now calibrate according to the situation. So for example, for my work, I do need a bit more of conscientiousness. I do need to be more on the perfectionist side of things because you don't want to mess up science. And indeed, you do have a lot of time to not mess that up. So that's why my PhD will last for years. But on the other hand, for something like this YouTube video, or when I'm having a conversation with my friends, that's not a time to be perfectionistic. That's a time to let go. That's a time to let the personality shine. And you may find that the more imperfectionistic you are, the more authentic you are, the more goofy and goofball and a bit of a trouble you are, the more your friends might like you. Because when you're not being perfectionistic, what's coming through is your real self. What's shining through is your authenticity. That heady part in you that just wants to control by being perfectionistic is like, let go on. That healthy part of you is sort of, you've let go of that part. And as a result, your real self might shine through. You don't even have that thinking going on, and people may actually like you more. So now the invitation, once you're stretched on either side, is to calibrate according to the situations in your life. All right, I hope you find this discourse, this mini discourse on perfectionism helpful. If you like this sort of a video, please subscribe to this channel, and may you be blessed with the courage to be imperfectionistic, which is other ways of saying, may you be blessed with the courage of feeling the moment as it is and expressing what you're feeling in this moment without worrying about what others think, or without worrying, or without putting too much pressure on yourself, without running that pattern of self-hate on yourself. This is Sankalp signing off.